February 10th, 2021 school committee meeting. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We are going to move to item 6 until exactly 7:05, when we will begin our budget hearing. Approval of minutes, January 27th, 2021. Is there a motion? Thank you, Mr. Ragsdale, seconded by Ms. Newhouse. All in favor? That's unanimous. Item B, approval to dispose of art tables at Wilmington Middle School. Is there a motion? Mr. Smaha, a second. Mr. Fennelly, all in favor? No, it's unanimous. Warrants, G420, G421, 22, R215, L50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, and FS32, 33, 34, 35, and 36. Is there a motion? Thank you, Mr. Smaha, seconded by Ms. Newhouse. All in favor? That's unanimous. We have payroll ending 2321. Is there a motion? Thank you, Ms. Newhouse, seconded by Mr. Smaha. All in favor? That's unanimous. We have warrants SPED 18, SPED 19, and SPED 20. Is there a motion? Thank you, Mr. Fennelly, seconded by Mr. Ragsdale. All in favor? No, one abstention. So, now way ahead of my time, yeah.
Did you ever state the attendance for the meeting this year and officially for the minutes?
Officially for the minutes, yes, there are.
Okay.
I did not know. There are 5 of us here. Mrs. Burns is not in attendance. Mr. Bueller is not here. We have 2 minutes, so we could move to the CIT update. Do you think we could do it in 2 minutes, Ms. Elliott?
I'm on.
Yeah? Okay.
All right.
So on January 27th, we had our second CIT day for the 2021 school year. The afternoon was structured to meet the varying needs of different educator groups. And some of the key highlights of the afternoon were at the elementary level. We focused on literacy instruction as the primary objective of the afternoon. Holly Banashevitz, our elementary language arts leader, worked with TLA, who we partner with for professional development and literacy, and organized workshops for K-5 educators. They were able to pick 2 different sessions that were most appropriate for themselves around literacy, but also specific to teaching in the pandemic. So, for example, one of the workshops was small group instruction during a pandemic and how to manage that. And also increasing cognitive rigor and engagement in remote and socially distanced classrooms. So those were some options that teachers participated in. At the secondary level, our curriculum team leaders and liaisons worked to really customize the agenda for the afternoon for departments in those grades, with the focus on curriculum development and sharing best practices related to teaching and learning while students are remote. And the timing was pretty good in the sense that we were just making the shift to our new model, revised model. So it was an opportunity for our teachers to really share best practices about how to effectively and efficiently stream children in or students in from home as well. Megan Estrada, Sarah Pop, and Tracy Casson, teachers at the high school, really developed some great resources and shared with all of our secondary staff on those best practices. So that was well received. We also had additional sessions. Jill Spiro, who is a district BCBA, offered training related to our ACE curriculum for staff members working in the STRIDES program. Julie Norton and Sabrina Paveo, school counselor and school psychologist, respectively, offered training on creating trauma-sensitive schools and classrooms. That was a session we offered early in the fall and brought it back for some additional staff members who weren't able to participate in the fall. We also had training for our special education staff at the high school on transition assessment, offered by Leanne Ebert and Alice Brown-LeGrand. So overall, I think the day was well received by staff. And again, I just want to express my appreciation for the support of this committee, because these afternoons are such an important opportunity for us to really have meaningful professional development. So not only, thank you not only for allowing the time in our school calendars, but financial support as well to be able to have a budget that can support some of these initiatives. So,
Thank you so much.
sure.
All right.
All right, thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. Ms. Dixie, are you working on the presentation? Did that go out?
Don't we have to vote to open the budget hearing?
Yes, yeah. You close the current meeting and open the budget meeting.
All right. So is there a motion to close the current meeting?
So moved.
Thank you. Did you get that, Ms. Dixie? So Mr. Ragsdale, second by Mr. Samaha. All in favor? Unanimous. Is there a motion to open the budget hearing? Mr. Fennelly, second by Mr. Samaha. Okay. All in favor? That is unanimous.
Thank you. Good evening. Tonight is the official budget hearing for the fiscal year 22 or the 2021-22 school year budget. The bulk of this information resembles the information that we've shared with the school committee to this point in time in the budget development process. As you know, we're many weeks, many months, in fact, into this period, and so tonight provides essentially a summary of the respective budget plan as it's developing on its path towards helping support our operations next year. This evening, in case those that are home are wondering, the Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 71, Section 38N, actually does require this form of a hearing. Budget hearing is a little more formality, as you detected, in terms of the specific location of this on the agenda and such, but we are offering this budget hearing tonight consistent with our obligation under Mass General Law. The summary, sort of a 20,000-foot view, if you will, of the current budget plan that is shaping up to help support the operations of the Wilmington Public Schools next year, includes planning for a projected enrollment of just a little bit over 3,100 students at the pre-K to 12 level. This plan also includes the anticipation of 65 out-of-district students. Obviously, that can change at any point in time, but right now, with our the information that we have before us, that's what we are planning for. Of course, revenue sources is an important component of building any year budget, not just in the middle of certainly of a crisis like we are navigating right now. We have a number of grants and contributions from other sources that help support the current year operation. It is important to note that there's an exception to that, and that's the COVID-related funding, of which obviously we've been working through as that of all districts around. This plan includes our, of course, fulfillment of obligations related to legal mandates in terms of those things as necessary. We are striving to meet the professional staffing guidelines where we have those, also the contractual commitments that we have, and as well, and I continue to think this is important to point out for the members of our community, that this budget plan largely pays for athletic services as well as transportation overall. That's not always the case in all school districts, but it is for ours, and it continues to be, at this point in time, the intention of our plans to include for that. There are, as have been mentioned previously, though, as it relates to thinking ahead for next school year, really a number of important considerations around enrollment. The impact of the pandemic on our enrollment has been significant. It's also been significant for the vast majority of school districts throughout the Commonwealth. And I think that that's, again, an important piece to highlight. There is various groups that are collecting data, various state organizations, and there are a vast majority of school districts who have seen a loss of enrollment as a result of the pandemic. We also here in Wilmington have enrollment decline that we've spoken about previously in previous fiscal years. It's something that we continue to watch and to monitor and in turn appropriately shape our planning around. But we also have, intersecting with that, specific contract-driven class sizes that we are obligated to abide by in terms of shaping classroom and student-teacher ratios. I won't spend much time here, but this is really for those in the community that are interested in how this enrollment picture shapes up. There are a lot of numbers on this page, but it provides a profile or a landscape view of our enrollment plan for pre-K to 12, and it also captures information on those homeschool students as well as private school students that we, as a school system, saw leave Wilmington last year. As has been mentioned before, we are planning and must, we feel strongly, anticipate the return of those students for next year. For if we do not, and the majority of them come back, we will be in a very difficult place operationally. And so that's why we're trying to approach it in that manner. As we still navigate, again, like obviously all communities and school districts are thinking ahead for next fiscal year, we also want to keep at the forefront our planning for how to best move this school district forward. And as has been talked about in this room before, the centerpiece of that is our strategic plan, of which we are, in many respects, unfortunately, on hold or on pause in some areas. But it's also with a view ahead to try and get back to some degree of normalcy, hopefully sooner than later, that we are going to focus in on returning to those very important priorities that many helped in this community formulate. Again, the strategic planning piece is included as part of our budget plan here, with the earmarking of approximately $75,000 that we believe very firmly will help support a number of different initiatives going forward. Specifically related to that $75, again, very briefly, I've spoken about this at a prior meeting, but for members of the community that may be joining us, we are looking to a number of action steps that were identified. These are not superintendent-developed action steps. I think that's very important to note, or the central office team or administration, but rather these action steps were developed by members of the strategic plan committee. That included staff, administrators, and members of our community, as well as members of our school committee. And so there's a number of them that this plan is going towards supporting as we move ahead. A 20,000-foot view, if you will, of the personnel. Obviously, as a very much a people business, the vast majority of our fiscal resources go to supporting personnel. And in our case, we often use you can see the acronym FTE, that's full-time equivalent staff members. We have both full and part-time, of course, but together as a whole, the current budget plan includes supporting the fiscal year 21 budget, right now, 489.6 FTEs. There's a very modest or slight adjustment that we have reviewed and identified going forward. But the bottom line, fiscal year 22, next school year, the recommended budget includes 487.9 FTEs. This next slide shows the impact of that from a salary adjustment standpoint, and you can see the fiscal year 21 budget broken down in a number of different categories. That includes, I won't name them all, but includes new positions that might be planned, steps and lanes, and a whole lot of other activity that falls under obviously our financial office and personnel in terms of tracking. The bottom line, percentage change from fiscal year 21 to fiscal year 22 is a 2.99% adjustment to salaries. There are indeed some non-salary changes that obviously as a school district we are obligated to support. This is a snapshot of what those entail and what those roll up to be. The current fiscal year 21 budget includes just over $9 million, to be
specific $9,318,630 for non-salary changes. Those non-salary lines include such things as some of our utilities, technology, textbooks, some maintenance and repairs, professional development, as mentioned earlier, transportation and athletics, just to name a few. And again, the bottom line percentage change there for non-salary changes is 0.7% going from this year to next year. So as you look at this in more of a rolled up way, if you will, the recommended budget for fiscal year 22, and this really represents collectively what we have identified as those necessary resources to open our doors in September. So rolling over our respective programs, planning for the continuation of our services, and abiding by those many other things that I mentioned earlier. In order to open our doors with a level service, if you will, that rolls up to be a 2.5% change, broken down, as you can see, in the two broad umbrella categories, salary and non-salary. And so as you can see, the top line, salary, the change is a little over $1 million. And again, 2.99% change. Non-salary, 0.7% change, for a combined adjustment going forward to 2.5. It is also worthy to note, certainly as it relates to the seeking of resources from members of this community, that there's also capital that helps as a complement to support our operations. We've talked before about capital and what goes into that, but it's also an extensive process that is methodical in terms of identifying what our current state is in terms of capital items and forecasting the end of life for some of those or the replacement of some of those. The vast majority of these capital items generally rolls up to technology or relates to technology, but it's also something that is very important to point out because ultimately, as part of this budget plan, it's something that resembles our request for fiscal resources going forward. A lot of items listed here. I won't go through them all, but again, for members of our community who may have interest, this is the projections for what we believe from a 5-year view would be necessary to help support and maintain what we have in place right now. Things obviously are very closely tracked in terms of end of life, replacement cycles, that kind of thing. And what this slide provides is an overview from fiscal year 22 through until 26. Of course, there are adjustments sometimes that need to be made. Sometimes things may literally break or become an issue for us to attend to, but by and large, we try and stick as closely as we can to that 5-year plan. A final note I think worthy to mention as it relates to the planning for not just next fiscal year for the support of the Wilmington Public Schools, but beyond. It's understood largely that we are in a very difficult time period right now, as is all communities throughout the state, throughout the nation, arguably. And unlike last fiscal year, when I was before you and the community in advancing this plan, we did identify a number of positions, staffing positions that is, that we felt were appropriate and necessary to help advance the services that we deliver and seek to deliver, to our students. Fiscal year 22 is different. It's different in the sense that there are no specific new positions that are being added. We recognize that now is not the time, especially with the fiscal challenges that everyone is heading into, some of which may be unknown. But at the same time, I do think it's important to provide a sense of some of the general thinking that I believe are necessary in terms of areas to continue to think critically about in advancing and moving forward our programs and services in the district. In no particular order, they include our commitment around equity and diversity, our continual efforts to expand social emotional learning and support therein, continuing to address a number of items that were identified in the Walker Report that specifically spoke to student support services, curricular-related positions and curricular leadership positions in an effort to try and advance our curricular programming and the support of teaching and learning, as well as the Department of Human Resources. And so those, I just think it's important to focus in on. The absence of positions this year does not suggest, quite honestly, an absence of where I believe there's opportunity and there's need, but it seems to be fiscally prudent not to make any recommendations for new staff at this point in time. And then lastly, superintendent goals and district goals. There's certainly a couple of areas that I've spoken about previously that don't have a direct impact on fiscal year 22, but certainly something that also somewhat similar to those other staffing categories that I mentioned a moment ago, are things that on the horizon may have a possible impact on the overall budget plan. And that's specifically focusing on the high school program, as well as the middle school program. And I won't take more time this evening. I've spoken about those, but certainly, again, worthy to note, I think, and point out for those members of the community. So this brings us to exactly where we're at, that at this juncture, at this point in time, this really concludes the budget presentations to the school committee and through this venue to the community. There are 2 more stops on this path, if you will, towards seeking a final budget in place to support our operations, the Finance Committee on March 4th, and then the town meeting on May 1st. And we're hopeful for the continual support of both the finance members as well as the town to help support our operations for next year. And that's the end of my presentation tonight.
Questions, comments?
So we would seek your vote, right, correct, Mr. Ruggiero, to approve?
Is there a motion?
I move to approve the 21-22 school year budget.
Second, Mr. Bowman. All in favor of approving the budget? Unanimous.
Thank you very much.
All right, that brings us to our.
I move to close the budget hearing.
Second? Second. Mr. Bowman, all in favor? Oh, thank you.
Do we need one more?
Yes.
I move to reopen the public meeting,
Is there a second? Mr. Kamala, all in favor?
regular school committee. I don't know what we're calling it.
Great, is that right?
So many
Okay,
motions.
comment. One person out there. Okay.
I got it.
We have two in-person comments this evening. There were about,
What did we have? 4 written comments?
oh yeah, 4 written comments. Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening, how are you?
I think, please
Good.
state your name and address.
Sure, my name is Darcy Martin. I'm at 26 Hopkins Street. So good evening, everyone. I am not here to talk about what's not working. I think we've made that pretty clear over the last 11 months. What I'm here to talk about today is next steps. So really, what is next for the Wilmington School District? What can we do to bring our kids back in person? The evidence is clear that the risk is low and the costs are high the longer our kids are outside the classroom. This is our chance to be innovative, creative, and forward-thinking leaders. We should want surrounding towns to say, Wilmington is really doing that right, or let's follow Wilmington's example. I am here as a member of the group of parents who are advocating for our kids to return to school full-time and develop strategies to help them get caught up. Every parent in the group has various reasons for joining this initiative and taking the time out of already very busy schedules to contribute to this effort. I know for me, I'm saddened to see my kids who once loved going to school start to resent it. Motivation is lacking and fatigue is setting in. Screens and worksheets simply don't replace face-to-face learning with a teacher. Academically, it's hard to keep them on track with new concepts, relying on parent or caregiver support on their home days, especially for our youngest learners that need so much one-on-one attention. I think I can speak for many parents that have Googled or watched a YouTube video on the differences between open and closed syllables, or what does subtraction with regrouping mean. Just a couple that I did recently. Kidding aside, I've got a second grader with a learning disability that doesn't qualify for the high needs group. Those kids are really struggling. My 5th grader, who is academically strong, has started a new school system amid a pandemic and is about to enter middle school with very few close connections. She is feeling isolated, and this is such a crucial time for her social emotional development. My stories are not unique. These are the stories that I hear over and over again. There are some tremendous parents in this community, and we are thinking creatively and outside the box on potential ways to help our kids get back in school. We would love to work together with all of you in this process, and I'm asking that you are willing to accept this parent feedback and have an open, honest, two-way conversation about what is best for our students and staff. I think we all realize that this is not a one-size-fits-all approach to opening schools, and while further guidelines are forthcoming, we must not wait. If we've learned anything over the last 11 months, there will be no magical email or announcement that answers all of our questions. We need to use the information we have at hand for what is best at getting our kids back in the classroom. This approach needs to look at the individual building and classroom level. The administration shouldn't make these decisions in a bubble. Involvement from each teacher, staff member, and of course parents is so crucial. They will have the direct knowledge as to what can work and what can't work. Finally, I'm asking, really begging, the folks in this room to start a dialogue with us and the members of the broader WPS community about what it will take to get our kids back in school full time. Some examples that we've been talking about as a group are: how will vaccines affect the plan? Can 3-foot distancing with masks be supported? What about additional PPE like plexiglass desk barriers or desk shields, for example, for classrooms that need it? How can pool testing be implemented? Is it supported by our teachers, staff, and community? And can lunches and snack breaks be set up outside or in other free space in the school to support more kids in school? Will parents support decreased transportation options if it means their kids are in school? Are there opportunities to bring back our youngest learners first? What are the timelines? Again, I want to emphasize this isn't about parents versus teachers or administrators. This is about working together for a common cause, which is giving our children the best possible education during a very difficult time. Time is of the essence, and we ask for your transparency. Other districts are already planning. Let's be leaders together, Wilmington. I recently read a statement from the CDC director. It stated, "Our goal is to get children back in schools. Schools should be the last places closed and the first places open." And I couldn't agree more. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to future collaboration on this effort.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, good evening. Please state your name and address for the record.
Ursula Tasto, 140 Chestnut Street, Wilmington. Good evening. I'm here today to offer help and support from a group of parents that are looking to partner with the administration and teachers to create plans for safely returning back to school full-time and addressing the learning gaps caused by this COVID pandemic. We appreciate all of the work that you've all done supporting our children either in hybrid or in remote this year. But there's still critical work planning that needs to happen to keep our students moving forward. We offer our expertise from our other industry experience. We offer our insights into our children, and we offer our time in support of this critical work that we can collectively provide the best education possible. We are looking to work together to create concrete and transparent plans on how a safe, full return to school will occur. Even with teacher vaccines imminent, vaccines for all of our children are not likely to appear this year. How do we plan for a return in that situation? We don't see that DESI guidance might change from that minimum 3 feet standard. So how do we plan for that standard that is in place today? And if restrictions are relaxed, it makes our planning easier. We're looking to understand what limitations exist and how we can partner to remove barriers to support all of our children. Our parent group, just like all of you, cares about the educational impacts caused by this pandemic. We would like to better understand the scope and scale of any gaps and are looking for any qualitative, quantitative, educational assessments on where our collective student body is versus where it would be in a pre-pandemic year. We are committing to make sure that we have the resources needed to assist children that have fallen behind or need focused support, starting with potentially this summer. Let's not look to follow surrounding towns, but instead push ourselves as leaders, offering a best-in-class approach. Let's dream of what we can achieve together. Students learning from teachers in a classroom filled with their friends. Children feeling confident in their skills. Students and teachers feeling connected to one another. Pride among teachers, administration, school committee members, and parents about what our town achieved. We are looking to partner together. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we've already done item 6, so we're moving to item 7, which is Superintendent's report. Dr. Brown.
Sure, thank you. And good evening. There are a number of items for people at home that may be following along or in the community. We did address with Ms. Elliott's comments earlier, item number 7A. That was a CIT day update, so I'll move on. There are 3 additional items. First, an update on the Massachusetts School Building Authority application. In the packet, there is a joint memo from Mr. Hall, town manager, as well as myself, that was addressed to the Board of Selectmen and the school committee. And as you'll see, really, this is a summary of some recent activity that continues in the background with our efforts as a town and a community to pursue possible program support through the Massachusetts School Building Authority, or MSBA. There are 2 fundamental programs, first let me back up. Massachusetts School Building Authority is the only known grant program in the Commonwealth that helps support new construction, renovations, or repairs. And so it is a very important entity. We sit in a building that is as a result of the partnership with Mass School Building Authority, the Wilmington High School, the most recent example. We have submitted a number of statement of interest, as you can be reminded of in the memo, 6 in fact, for the 6 elementary schools that we have. Again, those 6 are 50 years old, generally speaking, across the board. And so 6 significantly dated buildings for sure. And so we have been involved in a process, and we are making some headway, and pleased to be able to share that we are seriously being considered as a community for a possible partnership, far from it to be finalized. And thank you to a number of individuals, including Town Manager Hull, Chair Bryson, Mr. Eaton from the Board of Selectmen, as well as members of my central office team, and we've been having ongoing conversations, and we'll continue to have these ongoing conversations as we continue to try and best position Wilmington for possible invitation into MSBA in the near future. You'll be hearing more about this at future meetings, but as we just had a recent call, we wanted to provide an update to the school committee and Board of Selectmen on that. I'll pause there and see if there are any questions just before moving on.
Mr. Samaha.
Yeah, I had a question. It says that there were 70 SOIs submitted. Does that mean that there were 70 communities, or were there other communities like us where, multiple SOIs were submitted? I'm just trying to figure out, how good of news is this? Like we're 15 communities out of 70 communities, or is it Do you know that?
You know what, I would only be speculating, so that's a very good question. I don't know if that, they collectively refer to it as SOIs, so, you know, I'm not 100% certain, so I would be lying if I said I was. But what I do believe is the case is that, you know, that they've advanced that list down to more of a short list, if you will. And as we understand it, there are approximately 30 communities that are in the mix. And, you know, although we're a community that submitted multiple SOIs, at the end of the day, any communities that are invited in are being invited in for one project and one project only.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, that seems to be clear. It sounds like amongst 30 possibilities. And there is no magic number of invitees. It really depends upon their budget and how much they're possibly projecting for projects. But
Actually, it makes me think of just a follow-up question to that, too. When they say, because I know that because they weren't getting any new submissions, so is this like a, like 2 years worth of submissions that they're going through, right? Because they changed the deadline and then, I'm sorry if you don't know.
no, I believe it. I do know what you mean. My understanding is that they are right now focusing in on the 2020 applications.
Okay.
That they haven't opened up the 2021. I think that's right. They haven't opened up the actual calendar year 2021 applications. Sounds like they're planning to do so. They haven't done so yet. So they are still working through the 2020 applications.
Okay.
And they're just, they're much later than normal. Normally, the final decisions for that calendar year would be done in the early fall. So like so many other things, they're behind.
Okay.
So.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Ragsdale?
Given that they've been delayed in their processes, what are we thinking timeline-wise for when we need to make some of our own choices about the Wildwood School?
That's a great question. And, you know, I don't, that's not an easy answer for that. I think that, look, at the Wildwood's on borrowed time. As you know, there was intention and we had a capital proposal to go out to have a third party help us identify interim options for the Wildwood. That not RFP, the bid for proposal has not, I don't believe, gone out yet from the town, understandably, with also so many things going on. So we do need to analyze that, regardless, as I've said before, of the SBA and the trajectory that we're on. Even if we were to be invited in my opinion, I do not think that the Wildwood can continue in its current form and operation until some final new project is on the horizon many, many years out. So that next step, I think, is very important in terms of that capital item, which I believe was $80,000. And we continue to have conversations with Mr. Hull to try and make sure that that can happen for us. So I don't see anything changing for next school year. The building, I should stress, continues to be maintained, and if things become issues, they're attended to by the town. But it's still largely a Band-Aid right now, and we do need to find an interim solution for that school. Okay. Ms. Dixie, then. Okay, we're good. Can you remind me, sorry, Tristan, where do I find this on my drive? Is it shared drives? I know that you're presenting this, but. Okay. I'm gonna It's about the lack of glasses because they steam up, so that's why. All right, well, I told you my, okay. Very briefly, item number 7C, Middle School Task Force. You'll recall that this is one of the items, the goals that I brought before you previously, back in November, I believe it was. And I just wanted to provide you with a brief update on this now that we've had some movement with finalizing people who have come forward to volunteer. So the Middle School Review Steering Committee, as I've called it, with the primary purpose to really help assist in conducting a more full programmatic review of the middle school. And, when you think about that, when I think about that, that is everything. That is the program of studies to the structural design. I don't mean the physical building, but the structural design of the middle school teaming structure, as well as the schedule. And it seems like an important opportunity. And it seems like that important opportunity because of the fact that, by and large, as I've come to learn, that the middle school has remained relatively the same in format and structure for some time. And so a number of pieces of rationale that I think are timely or ripe, if you will, to conduct this program review. Certainly there's that piece that I just mentioned, but also we're also watching carefully the enrollment and the enrollment trends, which are, I would argue, much more significant, particularly at the middle school level than either the elementary or high school level. When you're offering a program that is structured around a team structure, and that in our case 4-person teams, and those provide a set of parameters that are very different and unique than the elementary and high school level. When you're trying to shape consistently what enrollment looks like across 4 teachers, always 4 teachers. So. And just an opportunity to also be thinking holistically about what the best programming is that we can deliver for the middle school students in Wilmington. There are a number of outcomes that I've shared all of these previously with you, but just as a refresher, and for those again in the community that are watching this and curious about this. No, I'm fine. No, I'm not. Hold on. I'm sorry. Okay. The members also, and really tonight, the real update here in part also is the fact that we have the good fortune of having a number of people who expressed an interest in serving on the committee. The original composition spanned a number of people both within the school staff as well as parent guardians. I'm pleased to say that we had combined almost 30 people who expressed an interest to serve, which is I think outstanding. This slide provides an overview of those that step forward to volunteer. The staff is on the left-hand side. Thought it to be important to have representation from the 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade respectively, as well as foreign language and unified arts, and also special education. Parent guardians include representatives from the 5th grade, from the 6th grade, and from the 7th grade. And students. The original intention was to include 9th and 10th grade students. The thinking there was they've obviously passed through the building. They have some sense of their experience. But we also had a middle school student who found out about this opportunity and reached out. And I will admit, I just didn't have the heart to say that he couldn't participate. So he's a part of the group. And school administration, we're still rounding that out. Certainly, interim principal Quirk will be a part of that. District leadership will have a part of that as well. And so much more to come. But this presentation will also get uploaded. I'll just take this opportunity to also say that This is the beginnings work that will span a good number of months. For those people who volunteered, but who did not get selected, please know that you will have an opportunity to be a part of this process throughout the course of the next number of months. This will be a very transparent process. My intention will be to have the work of this committee come back periodically to this committee and to the community to make sure that there's an awareness of what is happening with the middle school program review. I'll pause there if there are any questions before going on to the last item.
Mr. Redstone.
Do we expect that there will be some surveys, for example, of
I do.
middle school families?
I do, most definitely, yes. And the good thing is that there's a great body of research out there that really, to me, seems like the most logical starting point in terms of what makes a middle school effective. Middle schools have a lot of unique and important characteristics that have been identified in the literature over the last number of decades, and that seems to be a great starting point to take an informed view of how our school is or is not matching up with some of those key elements. So, most certainly. Okay, lastly, planning for return to school, 7D. There's not an item that's included in the packet on this, but let me just briefly speak to this. It is certainly my clear understanding that throughout many communities, there is talk that's starting to shift to the focus of returning to school. Fortunately, we are a community that is open for in-person learning for those families who have opted to have their children in school. I think many of us know that there are lots of, unfortunately and very sadly, a lot of districts that still are not in person and still remote. That is not the case for us. But nevertheless, it's not lost upon me for a moment that with vaccinations sounding soon to be coming for educators as part of phase 2, this shift in thinking about how we can consider returning more of our students to more in-person learning is at the forefront. Equally so, though, is also the planning for next year. That I know that we are in February, almost a year into this when things changed for our closure. But it will be time to start to plan for next year, and it should be that time sooner than later. I would take the opportunity, though, to also remind members of our community that, well, I also don't think that we should be waiting for specific guidance, whether that be from the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, whether that be from the CDC, or whether it be from the Department of Education. There also is some significant realities of that, of those agencies and the guidance that they provide, or the recommendations or the limitations in some cases that we really have to work and abide by. So that's not to say that I think that we should wait for those, but I also just think that it's important to point out that there are some significant limitations there. And just as one example and as a reminder, and I know that this has been a conversation more recently by some, wouldn't it be just possible to bring back all of our elementary students, all at once? The bus transportation guidance, for example, has not been changed. We could not transport all students on our fleet of buses tomorrow. There are limitations, and that includes, of course, in classrooms and 3-foot and 6-foot distances. So, despite the fact that vaccinations are on the scene and they're coming, those other practicalities, those other realities remain for us, as they do for other school districts. I also think, though, that this conversation does need to unfold in a way that is attentive not just to planning for what the physical realities are of our return to expanded in-person learning, but also other elements that include certainly in a focus on mental health and wellness. We talk frequently about that. We as a district, fortunately, have talked frequently about that. But it's not lost upon me that there's no more important time to hone in on that. And so we are beginning our work on that as well. Capturing learning loss and identifying how it is that we do proceed. It's also become crystal clear that we can't just resume school and instruction and learning like this did not happen. So what does that mean for our consideration of how we make adjustments in our practices, what data it is that we might collect, all of those things, certainly. The impact on activities. There's a yearning, and understandably so, to get back to normal for everything from sports to performing arts to the vast array of other activities that we obviously so look forward to providing for our students. Nothing has changed as we sit here right now on the guidance surrounding those things. So on the one hand, there are great limitations in our ability to restructure or reapproach the current things that we have in place now. But I recognize that we need to start to prepare for what that might look like. It's too soon to, for example, to talk about summer sports programs that we, the summer sports program that we've typically offered here in the summer for so many of our students. It's too soon because the Department of Public Health hasn't provided any kind of update on our ability to offer those programs. So we are in a bit of a point of tension here, and I know that there's great desperation and hope to begin to start to plan, and we should do that, but I also have to say that we also have to temper that to a degree, and realizing that there are certain restrictions that we need in place and need to understand clearly before we can make profound changes to what it is that we are currently offering or not offering right now. So I'll pause on that. I welcome any questions or comments that members of the committee might have.
Questions, comments? Mr. Smaha?
I'll say as a parent, as a teacher, and as a school committee member, like, I can't think of anything better than moving back to in-person instruction. I mean, on so many different levels. So I really appreciate that we're thinking about this and there's conversations about it. But I think that we also need to be aware that if we, as soon as we start to plan something, if there's then this guidance that comes in that changes everything about it, I think that's the aspect that we need to just be really, really aware of is, there's, we can have a plan, but then things come in and change. And I think that's been the nature of this pandemic, is you can't, anytime you try to plan and get ahead of things change. So I guess just on that note, I just say I'm really, really happy to be thinking towards full in-person, but I think we need to just be as strategic about it as we can, I think.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Mr. Rector?
So do you see this being parallel processes, that we're thinking about the fall in one way and then thinking about opportunities to increase in-person learning during this school year as sort of completely separate parallel processes, or is it all sort of different facets of one discussion? Does that make sense?
It does. Great question. I think it is different. As I'm thinking about it now, I think it's different facets of one discussion. Obviously, first and foremost is what can be realized in the next, 4 months or so of this school year, and possibly, what does that look like into the summer? But that should be the priority. But at the same time, it's also seemingly reasonable to assume that what it is that we might be planning for in the spring possibly may very well resemble what the fall will need to look like. And I don't have any additional information than anyone else does if you're closely monitoring the discussions at the state or national level. But that seems somewhat reasonable to assume. But the first priority has to be, what can we do, I think, in the coming months. If I may, one other thing that I forgot to mention that I just think it's worthy to point out, and that is, I also have heard from some who have increasingly been pointing to perhaps other communities, maybe not so close, but maybe not so far, that may be at a different place than, say, ours, say Wilmington. That they may, for example, be offering more in-person learning for a different segment, or particular segment, of their student population. There are some important things that this is not meant to serve as at all an excuse, but just context matters. Two things come to mind that are very different from one district to another. How modern the school building is. Typically speaking, more modern buildings generally have, than older buildings, larger classroom spaces. Over time, the identification of larger square footage that is appropriate to service students, for example, has increased than it was for, say, 30, 40, or 50 years ago. That variation in classroom space could make a huge difference in a school or a school district's ability to have more students in person, even if they're abiding by 6 feet, let alone at 3 feet. The other is transportation. The reliance upon transportation for students to arrive to school each and every day is considerably different from one community to another. There's a community not too far from here, as I understand it, that has 0 buses. They don't even use buses or rely upon buses. A school district that has more community-based schools, pre-K to 5 or K to 6, where there are sidewalk networks that allow for, may rely very little on student transportation or buses. And therefore, that's not a hurdle or an obstacle. I just would caution folks as they start to hear, and I think you will, and I think it's already out there. Some communities who are able to do this, why not us or why not that community? There are contextual factors that really do matter and could make the difference between the ability to support more in-person learning or not. I forgot to mention that earlier. I just thought it was worth noting.
I have just a couple of comments. So I guess I'm asking, first, are you suggesting a reopening committee now? Are we going to start to do that now, to collect data, to see what the options are, to see, I think part of people's frustration has been not a lack of transparency because we're trying to hide anything, but just those sorts of things. So, but when we come together and we say, well, how big is the classroom? How many students can I fit in there? How many kids are actually in there? So I wonder if we can provide some of that data through a reopening committee where we start to really look carefully at, well, how many kids are actually in that space? How many more could come? If we opened it, would parents choose to send their kids? Because if some of them would prefer to stay hybrid as is, but then there's a subset who would like to, well, then maybe we could. And with the spring coming, could we do something where we're using outdoor space? So it's sort of like, what are the options, and can we start to think through that?
Yes.
Now, as opposed to waiting. And so I think that's what we're hearing, and what I'm feeling as a parent is sort of like, let's at least look at what the options are, so then we can start to make some decisions. And I hadn't thought about this idea of would parents forego the bus if they knew they could, but I wonder if that's a possibility. People would say, I don't actually care about the transportation if I can get my kid in 4 days a week or 5 days a week.
Well, I think your question in there was, am I announcing or, what I'd like to propose is coming back to this committee with a more refined thoughts on what that exactly could look like. I don't know that it's necessarily just a mirror image of the reopening committee from the summer or the late spring, but it may be. So I'd like the opportunity, if I could, to come back to this committee with some more thoughts on paper, if you will, as part of a presentation of what that could take some shape and form for. So.
Mr. Raxton.
Yeah, on the transportation aspect, I also was thinking that would we consider something that you don't have transportation every day, that maybe on your normal, what we now consider your cohort days, you have transportation on Monday and Thursday, but your parents have to get the kids to school a different way. That is inconvenient in one way, except the trade-off may well be worth it in order to get more in-person time. And I had another thought, which is now just flown out of my head for a moment.
I have one more question about this idea of the reopening and what that committee might be charged with. And could there be sort of a separate piece that would look at sort of stuff we might be able to offer in the summer to address, certainly learning loss, but also just the opportunity for kids to be socializing, and for young kids and all kids. But I think to have these places, these avenues where they can then start to like the sports, or but is there a way to sort of take a piece of that and say, okay, we're going to focus solely on summer experiences, which I would imagine will have much more openness regarding that, because it'll be outside and it'll be.
I think it could. I think it should. I don't know what that looks like, but I think definitely thinking, thinking more broadly.
I'm so
Yep.
sorry. I'm getting lots of messages that people can't hear us. They can hear you, but they can't hear some of us. So I'm just going to pause and see if there's something wrong with our microphones. Can you ask? Yeah, so I've gotten a couple of messages from a few people that we can't hear some of the school committee members, so I just want to make sure everything's moving along. Sorry.
Lucky Joe, closest to the door.
Sorry, Joe.
Miss Dixie, I think we could, Miss Dixie, we could probably, could we get maybe Nathan to get the phone ready for the next section?
Sorry, Wilmington, except no one can hear us. Doesn't matter what I'm saying, sorry, but I'm sorry. They can hear you. Is there a light on your face now?
There is not.
Okay.
It hasn't been actually for a while.
Pull it closer?
We won't push them back, but they're all up as high as they can be, and
Okay, thank you.
nothing more they can do.
All right, let us know.
Did you have another question? We don't
I
want
did,
that.
but that's fine. We can come back.
Should we?
Are we
move on?
gonna,
Move on.
Sorry.
Okay.
well, are we gonna do anything more with this, or are we moving to the next?
I think we're,
I didn't mean to.
no, it's okay. Nathan, are you calling them right now? Okay, so we can come back to this if people have other questions or comments or suggestions. So we are going to move on to item 9A, which is,
Okay.
yes,
Sure.
American Academy of Pediatrics.
We are.
Call has been forwarded to an automated voice messaging.
I feel like I'm on one of those shows where they're playing jokes on me.
All right, well, I'm gonna jump in while we're waiting,
Yeah.
while
Yeah,
we're waiting for this. So, what I was going to ask is, it seems that if we start thinking about, some of these possibilities, and some of them are a little bit outside what we've done before, like if, we're not transporting kids every day, for example, or even if we're reducing the distance between them or anything like that. I think that, we're going to need to get a sense of how our parents feel as far as their comfort with those types of changes, because that's obviously going to, make a big difference.
Right.
To their comfort level of having, there are some parents who are comfortable perhaps at 6-foot distances, but not maybe with less. Of course, many parents are probably comfortable with less. And the transportation issue might be a real burden for some parents, but not necessarily for others. And then the same with staff. And I think that the more that we start to try to make concrete plans along these lines, and I'm not saying that the solution is just to constantly survey everyone, because I know that I know survey fatigue. But it is certainly important for us to try and gain a sense of, what the effect is going to be on people's ability on the parent side and on the staff side to be able to fit with these plans.
And if I may, I think, and thank you, that's a great point. And if anything, even in the advance of bringing together or reforming a reopening committee, if you will, I think that gathering that kind of information would not be that difficult in terms of, a question set or survey design. But I do think is a fundamentally first step to get a sense, to gauge where people's perspectives are on the very things that you touched upon. We may be surprised one way or the other in terms of the respective views. And it would seem to me to formulate plans in the absence of that data could be a setup perhaps that would be very problematic. So I think we should do that soon.
I would just add too that I know as we're talking about transportation, just as thinking in terms of equity and stuff, and I know that there are some families who rely on a bus to transport their kids because of work situations or mobility issues or what have you. And so I would really want to be very cautious as we talk about, not utilizing buses or not offering that in terms of equity for all students.
I don't disagree, and I think in a survey, something along those lines, we could start to gather some of that data too. And so if families were relying on it and could not get their children to school without it, then maybe there could be, okay, we have this bus here. It might mean moving a little bit, not right now outside your door, but we could probably work around that. My other,
And it might be something that,
I thought you were trying.
Could you maybe just lower the volume while you're doing it, please? Thank you.
it might be something that there's prioritization, that just like we prioritized cares to people who really need it, like working families who, we said that they have the first line, there might be a similar thing for transportation that we have to
Right,
figure out.
right.
Who really needs it and who is able to, to possibly work around it.
Absolutely. And my other, just not my suggestion or thought was, as we start to move into this work, coordinating with our existing PACs and our SACs, and I know they haven't always been utilized in that way, but I think that that's an organization in place that could really support us in some of this work, have direct access to an administrator who then has direct access to teachers, and so it's sort of, if we can rethink some of these organizations we already have in place to carry on some of this work, because as we learned from the structured learning time, it really does differ.
Right.
Building to building, it differs age group to age group, and so to just have one committee that's making decisions for the district doesn't always work.
Yes, agreed.
Okay, I think,
Good.
are we ready?
Doreen, are you there too?
Yes, I am here.
We are working on calling in Doreen
Okay.
Crow and Dr. Mark Curto.
So I'll introduce that if I may. So moving on to item 9, new business. We have a number of items here that we're going to tackle, but the first 3 really are very much related to the topic that we've just been talking about in many respects, and that's health and wellness and navigating these times of COVID and COVID-19, and that's 9A, B, and C. I'm pleased to have Doreen Crow, our coordinator of health services, that are with us tonight, as well as Dr. Mark Curto, who is the school physician. All districts, or most districts, I should say, usually have a school physician, and we've had the good fortune this year to be able to work more with Dr. Curto, given the nature of the circumstances before us. The 3 items that they're going to address, at least the first 2, first one, very briefly, the American Academy of Pediatrics and COVID sports guidelines. There's information in the school committee packet that's a little bit more extensive, including a presentation. We're not going to go through the presentation this evening, but either Ms. Crow or Dr. Curto are going to speak briefly to that, and then that'll be followed by the pool testing program, which we do have a presentation. So with that, Ms. Crow and Dr. Curto, are you there?
Yes?
Great. Nathan, could you just elevate that volume? Thank you. Doreen, do you want to go first, if you would, with item number 9A, the pediatrics and COVID sports guidelines?
Sure. We're just going to provide, good evening, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Brandon. We're just going to provide a very brief overview of the recently issued interim guidance from the American Academy of Pediatrics related to athletes who test positive for COVID-19. And that includes symptomatic and asymptomatic individuals. The new recommendation is for athletes to be cleared by a physician if they test positive for COVID-19. And the main reason for that is the risk of myocarditis. Then I'll ask Dr. Curtis if he wants to add anything else to that.
The relevant details would be there's a theoretical risk of, we know that COVID-19 causes vasculitis and causes other complications, and they've done studies in adults who have been hospitalized, athletes who have had complications related to their heart. And so the American Academy of Pediatrics decided, in the best interest of kids, even though the risk is theoretical, to make some guidelines for kids who are returning to sports.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Curto, and thank you, Doreen. I'll just pause there. Any questions from members of the school committee on this first item?
No, my only question would be, what does this mean for parents? I see here a parent-guardian letter containing the gradual return to play steps. So what should, I guess, parents, guardians of athletes be looking out for?
I'm opening the letter, hold on one second. So what would happen is a student would need to be cleared by the physician, And then when the student is cleared, they can return to sports, but it would be a gradual return to play. So a letter will be sent to the parents and guardians, which would state that, and it explains what that 7-day return to play looks like. And it's very similar to the return to play after a concussion.
Thank you so much. Other questions from the committee? Mr. Smalvo?
I have a question, just on the gradual return. It says day 5 and 6 is the return to normal activity. Would that mean that they would rejoin their team at that point? Or was there a longer period of time? Is that day 7? Or how does that work in terms of returning to team play?
Ms.
Want to take that one, Dr. Curto?
Sure. So when, if a child who tests positive, so we're talking about kids over 8 years of age. Right Practice reached out to a pediatric cardiologist, and we took the AEP guidelines and kind of came up with a little bit more concrete, which I can certainly provide to everyone. But we're talking for kids over 8 years of age who have tested positive for COVID. They're not allowed to participate in any sports until they're cleared by their doctor. If they've had mild illness, meaning less than 4 days of fever or symptoms, then they can be cleared by their pediatrician, and the pediatrician will review with them, hey, these are the symptoms that you need to look for, this is what you want to watch for as you return to play, and even give them the guidelines for return to play, which just like Doreen had said with the return to sports after concussion, it's essentially identical, where they start with very light activity, and then by the time they get to, day 4, day 5, day 6, they're doing more of their normal drills and returning to their team.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Fennelly?
And I would add that the athletic trainer will follow the students through the gradual return to play. So he will be working closely with the students, the athletes, as they gradually go through each step of the process.
I guess I'm just wondering.
One other piece to add would be any child who has had 4 days or more of symptoms actually have to be cleared by a pediatric cardiologist. So it's a much more involved process if they have had more than 4 days of symptoms with their COVID. And this doesn't apply to kids who say they tested positive in November. Then they obviously don't have to do a return to play currently because they've already been returned to play. So it's only for students who have recently tested positive, because we assume that everyone who has returned to play is still good.
Great, thank you. Mr. Fennelly has a question.
So interestingly, my first question was what would happen if there was more than 4 days of symptoms. So thank you for addressing that. I guess I'm just wondering, I'm looking at the letter and I don't see sort of an implementation date. Like, are we following this guideline now? Is this already in place, or is there a plan to put this in place? How does that work?
Ms. Crow, did you hear that question, Doreen?
I did, yes. Ms. Musio and I talked about this. I believe that we'll be starting using the new guidelines after February vacation. I can clarify that with her.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Okay, it does not appear like there are any more questions, so thank you very much on that. Item number 9B is pooled testing, and there is a presentation that accompanies this. It is not included as part of the packet, but we will certainly get it, make it available to members of the community as well. And again, Ms. Crow and Dr. Curto are going to speak to this. Pooled testing has been a focal point of some conversation throughout the state recently, and we thought that it would be important to provide some information for our community around our consideration of this program and sort of where we stand. So with that, Ms. Crow, if you want to take it away.
Sure, thank you. Good evening again, everyone. So we're going to take a few minutes to talk to you about pool testing. We'll share some general information about the share some data with you that we've collected and some information that we gathered from one of the districts that piloted the pool testing program, and then we'll make our recommendations. You can go to the next slide, Kristen. Are we on slide 2?
We are. Go ahead. Yep, we're following. Thank you.
Thank you. So the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education and the Executive Office of Human and Health Services introduced COVID-19 screening testing using a pool testing approach in the school setting as an additional mitigation strategy for SARS-CoV-2, otherwise known as COVID-19. The goal of the program is to test asymptomatic students and staff during in-person learning. During the initial 6-week period, participating districts and schools would receive test kits, support from a testing service provider, and the testing software to track results. All of this is at no cost to the school district or schools. In most cases, districts and schools will administer the test using existing staff resources. Following the initial 6-week launch, districts and schools may continue using pool testing by purchasing the test and any other accompanying testing materials, software, or support from a statewide contract using federal stimulus dollars. Slide. The program involves the following steps. First, written consent from participants. Then pool testing on site is performed once a week, conducted by school personnel. Then follow-up individual testing by Wilmington Public School staff for any pool tests that are positive. And then the fourth step is contact tracing of positive cases. Pool testing consists of weekly collection of nasal swabs, and that's the short swab, and grouping of cohorts of specimens together. Pools with negative results continue to remain in class and at work. Pools with positive results must quarantine, and then all individuals are tested with a PCR test separately, and anyone with a positive PCR test will be isolated in accordance with state guidelines. So remember, isolation is different than quarantine. Next slide. So the districts are responsible for providing the personnel and hours to distribute and process consent forms, collect all of the specimens from staff and students, and that could include some non-medical staff at the middle school and high school to supervise self-collection. And what we've learned is that some districts are allowing self-collection from grades 5 and up. Districts would also designate and set up testing areas in buildings to minimize classroom intrusion, and set up testing, management, specimen collection, and also transport them to the lab. They would also maintain records of initial results and design and administer the follow-up testing, which is the reflex testing, or that second testing that I talked about. Notification and follow-up of subsequent quarantined individuals, and then training for staff. So additional training would be necessary for administering both the pool testing and the reflex testing. A lot of districts are using Find X Now testing, which would be available at cost, and additional training and program setup would be necessary for that. Next slide. The goals of the program are to identify asymptomatic individuals and ultimately to have less individual testing done. Department of Elementary and Secondary Education will provide the 6-week trial program, which includes what I've already mentioned, the test kits, support from service providers, and testing software. Next slide. So Dr. Brent formed an advisory team to review the information from DESI on pool testing. We also participated in webinars to become more familiarized with the program. The team also reached out to the Middlesex School District to inquire as to whether or not these districts were planning to participate in the program. We also reached out to the pilot program and gathered more information via staff and family surveys to get a sense of interest. Next slide. graph here shows you the Middlesex school districts and whether or not they're planning on participating in the DESE pooled testing program. There are 12 districts in the Middlesex League, including Wilmington. And so what you see here is that 6 districts are planning on participating in the program. 4 districts are not, and 1 district, at the time that we surveyed them, was still undecided. Of the 6 districts that are planning on participating in the program, some of them are only planning on piloting specific populations, such as maybe just their high schools. Next slide. So as we mentioned, we had 3 separate conversations with Watertown Public Schools. They were one of the school districts that piloted pool testing for this district. And this is some of the information that we gathered from them. Individual testing was started for staff back in September. Then they started to do pool testing for students once a week in October. And they did experience some initial challenges with consent. At the high school, they're pooling students on arrival and between classes. At the middle and elementary schools, the classrooms are pooled together. At the time that we talked to them, they had done approximately 400 staff tests, and out of those tests, 18 tests came back positive for asymptomatic individuals. Also at the time, they had performed about over 600 student pool tests. 9 of those pools showed positive, and at least 1 case out of each of those pools ended up being positive. Sure, yes.
One piece in terms of the asymptomatic positive cases for the staff, they tested 400 staff weekly for 17 weeks, and they had the 18 positives. The pool testing for the students was over 13 weeks. So it was 13 weeks they have done hundreds and hundreds of tests, and they've had 9 positive pools with at least 1 test. But I figured the amount of weeks was an important piece to kind of see in terms of the relevance of the data. Go ahead, Joy. Sorry.
Thank you. I missed that part. And so a team of 2 to 3 nurses is coordinating their program and performing all of the testing. They do provide additional hours of work and pay during non-working hours to get the job done. And it does cost them approximately $22,000 a week to run this program. Did I miss anything else? Okay. Next slide. So now we'll take a look at the Wilmington Public School survey results. So we surveyed parents and guardians to get an idea of the interest in whether or not parents would be interested in having their child participate in the pool testing program. 812 parents and guardians responded. There were responses from every school with more of a response from the middle school. Go to the next slide. During hybrid learning, if pool testing were offered at Wilmington Public Schools, approximately 54% said they would participate and 45% said they would not participate. Next slide. And so we also asked about perceived benefits and concerns. Some of the benefits that perceived were identification of asymptomatic individuals, having peace of mind, reduction of spread, keeping schools open, moving to full in-person learning, increased confidence, and benefits to the community. The concerns were anxiety, stress, and trauma to students, invasive testing, time in learning, unnecessary quarantining, a false sense of security, reliability, meaning false positives or false negatives, prefer going through their own nutrition, no spread in schools, and limited staff resources. Next slide. And looking at the data 79 staff responded. Again, it was spread out to all the schools with a lot more respondents from the larger schools. Go to the next slide. During hybrid learning, if pool testing were offered at Wilmington Public Schools, approximately 78% of staff said they would participate, and 22% of staff said they would not participate. Next slide. We did ask the same question, what were their perceived benefits? And as you can see, some of them are excellent. And we also asked about concerns, and some of those are similar as well. Okay, next slide. We also wanted to mention that the current CDC considerations for COVID testing include people who have symptoms of COVID-19, people who have had close contact with someone with COVID-19, people who have taken part in activities that put them at higher risk for COVID-19 because social distancing doesn't happen, such as traveling, attending social gatherings or mass gatherings or crowded indoor settings. And people who have been asked or referred to get testing by their healthcare providers, the Community Tracing Collaborative, or the State Health Department. Next slide. And some other data that we thought was important to share is the current town of Wilmington data. So for the past 2 weeks, the positivity rate has gone down significantly. It's at 4.9% right now. In the last 2 weeks of Wilmington Public Schools, there have only been 5 COVID-19 positive cases. Next slide. So overall, considerations are the cost of maintaining the testing program after the 6-week period. A lack of participation as parental consent is required. A test is a moment in time and may provide a false sense of security. Concerns about whether students and staff be inclined to come to school for testing and they may otherwise stay home. Would there be a toll on the nursing staff that would be pulled to do poll testing when they were needed in other situations? There's a time-bound requirement for contact tracing. It needs to happen shortly after the results come in, and my understanding from districts is it's happening over the weekend and mostly on Sundays before students and staff return to school the following week. There are logistics to consider for reflex testing, and that's that second test that's done for positive pools. And pool testing is not considered an indicator of an increase in in-person learning. And then the community and the school data are currently low. Dr. Curto, was there anything else that you'd like to add?
There's a few pieces that I would like to add. One is when you consider the test that's being done. The test that's being done, and this goes to the perceived benefits, is that the test is not being done in order to identify positive individuals. You're not trying to grab these kids as they're going into the school and finding their positives and eliminating them in order to stop school spread. Really, the test is not diagnostic, the test is a screening test. So really the test is not being done to identify them, it's really being done just to prove that there are mostly kids who are negative, testing negative for COVID in school. A little piece of data behind that is when you look at the type of test that DESE is recommending for this. I went on the DESE website, I went on their webinar recently in order to try and delve into it, because some of the school systems are saying that DESE is using PCR, but everything on the DESE website says they're using a Binax Now test, and the Binax Now test is an antigen-based test. And I'm more than happy to answer any detailed questions, but I'll try and keep it brief. So antigen testing looks for a protein. It's not as very sensitive. PCR testing looks for the actual nucleic acid. That is a much better test. So DESE is recommending of which is approximately 35%. So the way you want to look at that is for every one positive it picks up, that 35% is missing two positives. So again, this test is not diagnostic. We're really not trying to capture those kids who are positive and keep them out of the school, because that seems to be what a lot of the perceived benefit for the teachers and parents have been. A PCR test, on the other hand, is 95% sensitive. So that's what we use in my office to identify individuals with COVID, where we will use the Abbott ID Now, not the Binax Now, but the ID Now, which is a PCR test, and so it's much more accurate. So that's what we use to identify. So DESE recommends using this antigen-based test in order to do the screening. Now, when it comes to recommendations from the CDC only recommends screening testing in communities with moderate to high amounts of COVID in their community, because they find that if the level of COVID is too low, the test becomes even less accurate. And the CDC does not recommend universal screening ever, so they don't recommend testing every single staff member or every single student as they're coming into school. And then we have one more slide to do.
Oh, yep. Yep. And so what we want to share now is that, you know, as you can see, there is lots of information that we gathered, lots of data that we collected, and there are a number of key factors that were considered in determining whether or not to participate in the DESE pool testing program. Logistics were a consideration, financial consideration, cost-benefit analysis, results of the recent surveys from both staff as well as families, and the overall consideration of the perceived actual impact on health and welfare of the students and staff in support of our operations. And so with that, I would say after extensive discussion and consideration, it is our recommendation that Wilmington Public Schools does not participate in the DESE pool testing program.
Thank you. Thank you, Doreen, and thank you, Dr. Curto. Perhaps members of the school committee have questions? That's a lot of information presented here, but again, as I think I said at the outset, it's recognized that there's lots of interest in pool testing. It is something that Department of Education has been talking about at the state level for a little bit of time now. But for all of the factors and reasons that we shared here, as has been mentioned, we just don't think that at least at this point in time, this program would be something that we should move forward with, and so that's the recommendation here.
Mr. Braxton.
Dr. Curto, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the data on in-school spread, because I think that a lot of people have the concern that without broader testing, how do we really know that we don't have asymptomatic spread within schools? And I was wondering if you can speak to what data we have on that.
Sure. It's a great question. The thought was at the very beginning of the COVID epidemic that because with younger children, up to 60% of them, if they catch COVID, are asymptomatic. And even with preteens and teens, that's 40 to 50% of that age group, if they catch COVID, are asymptomatic. So if they're catching it and going into the schools, the fear was always that you were going to have in-school spread. There have been a number of studies done back then, recently, that have confirmed that there is minimal to no spread of COVID within schools. There have been rare cases of staff giving it to students,
Other questions, comments? Mr. Fennelly?
I'm just curious, and this might be a question, Paul, for you, but on one of the slides, we talked about Watertown and costing $22,000 additional dollars a week to run this program, and we say that financial considerations are one of the reasons we're recommending that we don't move forward. Do we know what it would have cost us, ballpark figure, to do this?
Yeah, there's not a lot of information on the total costing of it, but what's out there, back of the envelope, it's $250 to $350 for 11 weeks, which would be kind of the 11 weeks after the free trial is done. There's a lot of different cost buckets, but that's what back of the envelope comes out to, which is, close to $22,000 a month.
Watertown is a similar size school system as ours, so.
And so when you say $250 to $350, that's $250,000 to $350,000 for that, past that 6-week trial.
Yeah, so the 11 weeks after that.
Okay.
That's a back of the envelope, based on whatever information the DESE had out.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, comments? I was going to ask my question. No, Dr. Curto and Ms. Crow, some schools are saying they're doing PCR, but they're also doing pooled testing. Is that not correct, or are some schools engaging in pooled testing with a PCR test initially?
So on the DESE website and on their webinar, there's a little asterisk that actually says if you opt to do PCR testing, it's going to have to be covered by the school system, and it's not going to be covered by DESE. I can tell you PCR testing in our office, each individual test is $120 each when we're doing the testing in our office. So if you have a pool of 10 where one of them's positive and that gets sent out, you're talking $1,200 just to test everyone else in that group just for the reflex testing. Again, the DESE website specifically says that they're recommending using the antigen-based. When I called and spoke with the Watertown system, they send theirs out to a lab, so they're not even going through DESE, so they're actually using an independent lab to do theirs. I'm not sure what Middleton does. I did not speak with them.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ragsdale.
Dr. Curto, can you talk a little bit more about what the difference is between what you said is a screening test versus, I guess, another form of COVID testing? Can you unpack that a little bit?
I'm sorry, that was really echoey. If you want to know the difference between diagnostic testing and screening testing?
Yeah, yes, if you can describe that.
Pool testing versus individual testing?
If you can describe the difference between the diagnostic versus the screening testing.
I'm sorry, I still did not get that. It's so echoey.
The difference between the diagnostic and the screening.
Gotcha, got that. So diagnostic testing is a kid comes into my office, they have symptoms, and I want to diagnose them, so I do a PCR test in order to diagnose them with COVID. And so you want to use the most accurate test possible, so you do a PCR test in order to identify that individual. A screening test, you kind of look at it the reverse, so you're not really trying to identify the positives, you're really trying to prove the negatives. And so you want a test that is going to show you a lot of the true negatives without having a lot of false positives. And so a screening test is almost the reverse of a diagnostic test. So you could think of a diagnostic test where you're looking for the true positives and a screening test where you're looking for the true negatives. Does that make more sense?
Yes, and what are the appropriate circumstances for using screening tests?
For using screening tests, so in the case of, for instance, COVID, if you wanted to, say you had an office building and you had a lot of your employees coming back into
Dr. Curto and Ms. Crow, just a few weeks ago, we were about 14%, I think that's right, and now we're at 4%. What are the chances of us jumping back up to a high percentage where something like this might make sense? Or are we sort of on this downward turn, like where we think we're actually going to stay 4 or lower? Any sense of that? Any prediction?
So if you look at the overall trend in Massachusetts, back at Christmas time, Massachusetts is having about 8,000 positives a day. About 3 or 4 weeks ago, it was down to about 5,000 a day. A couple of weeks ago, 3,000 a day. And just recently, I believe it was 1,200 and 1,300 the last couple of days. So if you look at the overall trend, it's going down, down, down. And when you look at, so if we compare COVID to a previous pandemic, because we all know back in 2009, H1N1, swine flu, we saw that pandemic play out almost exactly as COVID-19 has played out, where with the swine flu, we had this big peak March, April, May. It died out June, July, August. Because it was the flu, because we had tests, we didn't have a vaccine for swine flu at that point, but we had treatments for the flu. We could diagnose it because we had testing. Everyone, there's no masks, there's no social distancing. Everyone goes back to school, and of course kids are germy, so no mask, no social distancing. We saw a huge spike September, October, November. Now the swine flu vaccine is released, and any parent who had a kid back then who was looking for the swine flu vaccine knows how crazy it was trying to get the swine flu vaccine. And then after the vaccine came out, and as we reached herd immunity, it basically died out December, January, February, and it was fine after that. So COVID-19 has actually paralleled that perfectly. The only difference, is instead of seeing that second peak start in September, it wasn't until mid-October that we started to see that second peak because of masks and social distancing, and come the holidays, we started to see that second peak. Now that we have the vaccine, now again that we're close to herd immunity, we should actually continue to see these numbers just go down, down, down. And if you think about the numbers that we had last summer when we were at our all-time low, Massachusetts was seeing about 200 or 300 a day, and right now we're at 1,200, 1,300. We're actually not far off from where our numbers were last summer. So we should continue to see these numbers go down, down, down. I expect to see the numbers drift up a little bit because of the Super Bowl parties that were happening that we don't know about, but I'm sure there was some germ sharing there, and we know what happened after Thanksgiving when all the college students came home. We had a surge on a surge, and then Christmas, New Year's, we had surges then, and now we're in that downward slope of that. So I would expect that the numbers just continue to go down, down, down from here, so that as we go further into this school year, the numbers are only going to get better and better.
Thank you very much. Dr. Ragsdale?
Do you anticipate any spikes over February break or April break if families are traveling?
I don't. There have been a lot of people who have started to travel recently, and I don't anticipate that there's going to be huge numbers related to that. I think as the numbers go down a little bit, we might see them get a little stagnated. Like, I don't expect the Super Bowl parties to kind of spike us back up to 3,000 or 4,000, but it wouldn't surprise me if we bumped from 1,200 to say 1,500 or 1,800 just for it to quickly come back down again. But I don't anticipate that that would happen. A lot of people who are traveling are doing a lot of COVID testing before they go, when they come back. We're certainly getting a lot of requests in my office for that, and testing is so easy
I just have one, and I'll make this quick. I just have one comment, which is that when this program was rolling out, I was, excited for it, and I was a booster of just like, yes, this is great. We should do this. We should definitely pursue this. And, having now spent more time learning the details of it and what it would entail and what benefits we would get from it, partly from being part of this kind of team that we put together to look at this. I've come around to the other side, and one of the big parts is that there's not enough buy-in in our community, I think, to get the benefits that even it would, on its own terms, want. If we're only getting a little bit more than half the families who are interested in participating, then it's of it's of less benefit than it would have been hoped for. And I think with that, combined with the information that we talked about tonight, and the tremendous cost and time and energy and just district bandwidth that administering this program would take, you really have to have a lot of concrete benefit to make it worthwhile to spend this time and energy and money using this program. And so I've come around to the other side, that I think this is the right way to go.
Thank you. Well, Dr. Curto and Doreen, thank you for being here for tonight, for your patience and for taking us through this. And thank you, committee members, for engaging in this. I've appreciated and had the wonderful opportunity to work with both of these folks throughout the last number of months, and I very much appreciate their participation in these discussions here to try and come to what I think is, and I appreciate your comments, Mr. Ragsdale, a very rational choice, well thought out, really truly pursued from multiple angles, and lots of information considered. And so I thank you for all of your time and your support for this tonight, and thanks again for being here.
Thank you for having us. Have a good night.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
You're very welcome.
The last item, somewhat related certainly to the conversations, is item number 6C, and there is a memo that's in the packet on this, and that's pertaining to vaccinations for staff and the plan there, if you will. The reality is there's no sort of grand unveiling about what the plan is for vaccinations of staff here in Wilmington, but this outlines exactly the information that we have right now, which is no different than anyone else in the state in terms of the state's projections and timelines and such. So this is just a recap of phase 2, which is what we are officially in the state right now in terms of vaccinations. They subdivide these phases into groups, as I'm sure many are aware. Group 1 is that of individuals age 75 plus. Group 2 in phase 2 is individuals age 65 plus with other variations of medical conditions and so on. And Group 3 are other workers, including early childhood, daycare, and K-12 workers, employees. So by all accounts, it seems that Group 3 is coming. We don't have a specific timeline just yet, but I should point out that it is the thought currently by Ms. Newhouse, our director of the Wilmington Board of Health, that she may have a supply chain coming the early part or some point in April, at which at that point in time she can help partner with the school district and begin to vaccinate staff. Of course, it should also be pointed out that employees can pursue their own vaccinations if they live in another town or community or such. But we're carefully monitoring that. We are in close contact with Ms. Newhouse, and we'll anticipate, hopefully sooner than later, a supply chain in which we can start to provide vaccinations for staff who are interested here in Wilmington. So happy to take any questions if you have, but just wanted to provide that as an update. I know lots of interest around this. Okay. All right, transitioning to a completely different topic, we have 2 items left under the new business section. The first up is the Wilmington High School Program of Studies, and Ms. Peters, I think, is around the corner, and she's going to make an appearance in just a moment here. As much as we wrestle with, obviously, these discussions around COVID-19 and how we're navigating this, We are also trying very hard to be forward-thinking and looking ahead to next school year. As an example of that, the school calendar will be coming before you on the next committee meeting for next year. Somewhat hard to think about in some respects, but something we have to do. Similarly, Ms. Peters and her staff, welcome, are also thinking about the program of studies for next school year. And as always would be the case, this would be here for you for your, before you for your consideration and approval. And so Ms. Peters is here, thank you for waiting, to provide a glimpse of any of the highlights and changes for the program of studies for the 2021-22 school year.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. We have just a few changes, actually. We have always had an opportunity for credit recovery at the high school. We just decided this year that our counselors decided that they would like to have a formal process and procedure, so they included it in the program of studies. That's the first change. The next three changes are actually all related. We are in the process of a 4-year implementation of a new social studies curriculum, and next year will be our 3rd year of the revision, and that involves changing our United States History 10 course to a U.S. History from a Global Perspective Part 2. So because of that change, we have at the 10th grade level an interdisciplinary course that includes an English 10 class and a U.S. History from a Global Perspective. So those course descriptions also changed based on the revision of the social studies curriculum. The only other change we have is an addition, well, we have a change in just the description of the Intro to Music Theory and Arranging course, and we also added an advanced music theory and arranging course to go along with that as a 2nd semester course. And that's it for our changes for next year.
Thank you. Thank you for providing the cover sheet that explains all the changes. That's very helpful.
You're welcome.
Are there questions or comments for Ms. Peters? Mr. Ragsdale?
Just to clarify, so this is the social studies program, this is just bringing us into alignment with the 2018 frameworks that were
Yes.
the social study frameworks?
They started with the 8th grade. We did the 9th grade this year. Next year is 10th, and then the next year will be the 11th.
Any other questions or comments? We were excited, some of us were excited to see the music theory and arranging. Nothing else? Okay, so we need a vote.
Correct.
Is there a motion to approve? Mr. Smaha, second. Mr. Ragsdale, all in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Have a
you,
nice evening.
Linda.
Thank you.
You too.
Thank you very much. Okay, item 9E, FY21 financial report. Mr. Ruggiero.
Thank you. You have in front of you an update of the FY21 financials as of January 11th. This was originally on the last school committee's agenda that we moved to this one. So the total appropriation for FY21 is $43,722,000. Through early January, we've spent and encumbered $42,030,000, and at this point, as of January 11th, we have a balance of about $1.7 million. Much of that will be eaten up. I mean, that's not quite halfway through the year, but we will be eating some of that up. But I think everything's trending in the right direction, and again, I'll project that we'll end the year in the black, in a positive spot.
Thank you. All right. Item 10, we have subcommittee reports. Are there any subcommittee reports?
Weren't there two motions with the financial report?
Well, I was just gonna, is there, do you need a motion?
Oh, yeah, there are, I'm sorry, there are two, there are two, I forgot about those.
So I said, I'm looking at Paul, and he's
It's
not doing
not-
anything. I'm thinking,
it's
am I
not-
missing something?
Yeah, no, that's,
Yes, there is a recommended motion. Mr. Ragsdale.
I move to allow the Assistant Superintendent of Administration of Finance to move budgeted funds from the salary adjustment line to the proper line items to account for lane changes and contractual salary increases.
Is there a second? Mr. Fennelly, all in favor? Thank you. And there's another motion. Would someone like to read that? Mr. Fennelly?
Move to allow the Assistant Superintendent of Administration and Finance to distribute the circuit breaker offset to the appropriate special education tuition lines.
Thank you. Is there a second? Mrs. Newhouse, all in favor? That is unanimous.
thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Dave, for reminding me.
I said, what are motions here? Why am I not, no one's stopping me. Subcommittee reports. I think no one made eye contact, so I'm assuming there are. Fair enough. Okay. All right. Correspondence. So I do, does anyone have any correspondence? And then I do have one thing to read. So this is a letter written from Steve Bjork that I'm going to read for you and to the community, and then I have a couple of notes. So this is from Steve Bjork. It says, "It is with regret that I will be tendering my resignation, effective immediately, as a member of the school committee. I have thoroughly enjoyed the work over the last 7 years, but my personal and professional life at this time have made it impossible for me to fulfill all of my responsibilities effectively. I will miss the opportunity of working alongside such committed individuals. Sincerely, Steve Bjork." On behalf of the school committee, we are grateful to have worked alongside Steve, and he will be very missed. Steve served on this board for 7 years. His leadership, knowledge of our community, historical knowledge of the board, and a sense of humor have all contributed to our team and our ability to work together in the best interest of Wilmington students. We will plan to celebrate his years of service in the near future. Our policy on unexpired term fulfillment says, when a vacancy on the school committee occurs for any reason, the Board of Selectmen and the remaining members of the committee share the responsibility for filling it. As provided in the law, the school committee will notify the selectmen that a vacancy has been created within 30 days after it has occurred. After 1 week's notice has been given by the committee to the selectmen so that voters of the town may have the opportunity to state their candidacy, the two governing bodies will meet to fill the vacancy by roll call vote. For election to fill a vacancy, a candidate must receive a majority of the votes of the officers entitled to vote. The person so elected will fill the seat on the committee until the next town election, at which time a member will be elected to serve the remainder of the term, if any. This is MGL 4111. Residents who wish to serve on the school committee should send a letter of interest to the town manager's office, directed to Jonathan Eaton, chair of the select board, at 121 Glen Road. The town manager's office will distribute the letters to each member of the Board of Selectmen and school committee in advance of the joint meeting. We'll be working on selecting a date for the joint meeting during the month of March, and I will communicate that to you as soon as possible. And that's what I have.
Just a question on that, because is it my understanding that then they have to run in April?
I think it depends on, so this is what we've been sort of trying to determine. It will depend on whether or not that person is appointed before papers are due at town hall in order for their spot to be on the town election. You know, so there won't be, if there's not, someone doesn't return their papers by March 5th, there's no seat, this is my understanding, at the election in April.
Would it be the town's responsibility to put, even if there's no one who's pulled papers, to put a vacant seat on the election so people can vote for it? I mean, have we searched out council's opinion on this, on whether or not it needs to happen?
So we have talked to our council and town council. Do you want to report out on that?
Yeah, it's a very good question. If the timeline for, I hope I'm going to say this right, if the timeline in which it has closed, in which for names to be included on the ballots, then the understanding right now currently is that this, through that joint process that the chair just described, the individual selected for that seat between the Board of Selectmen and the school committee would then serve in the role through until April of 2022. because Mr. Bjork had 1 year left, has 1 year left on his term after that, then in April of 2022, there would be an election for someone to then fill the last and third year of his tenure.
But we were kind of announcing it tonight. I mean, they've got 3 weeks to pull papers. I don't understand why we wouldn't encourage people to pull papers, put it on the election, let the town vote for it rather than 11 people.
Well,
I guess I don't understand.
we still have to appoint someone.
Either way.
But why would you
Right.
appoint someone for like 2 meetings?
Well, because the law, this is what it says, we need to appoint someone, so I think what's gonna
But
happen.
like, I know when I was elected, it took over 2 months to appoint somebody. So if you opened it now, let them pull papers, by the time you were gonna appoint them, the election's gonna happen anyways. Just curious.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's still, 3 weeks? I mean, March 5th is the deadline for returning papers. People can absolutely pull papers and get signatures and return them before then to be on the ballot in April.
But would it be for 3 seats or for 2 seats?
Well, it would be to finish.
Would there be a third seat added to the ballot for a 2-year term?
For a 2-year term, right?
Yes.
Not for a 3-year term. Because I think the idea is that you want to keep the changeover consistent so that eventually it gets back to 3, whatever the organization is. That it wouldn't suddenly be now 3 seats for 3 years. It would be 2 seats for 3.
And 1 seat
And
for
1
2
seat for 2.
years?
Right, it would be like in the recent Board of Selectmen election, in which there were
But they didn't
2.
appoint anyone, they just opened it up on the ballot and let somebody vote, let the whole town vote for it.
Right, but, well, that was also different because they didn't have a resignation until, they didn't actually have a vacancy. That Selectman Loud had announced that he was going to step down at the end of that, basically at the election. So there was no, like, missing period in there where they needed to appoint someone. But it was 2 seats that were up for election for full 3-year terms, and then there was the 1 seat that was only for the remaining year of his term that then required rerunning. It's similar to that, except that here we have an actual vacancy that we do need to fill one way or the other by appointment.
I mean, and if we appointed someone and then the town elected somebody else in April, they'd only be serving for 2 meetings. To me, it's kind of a waste of time because they're not going to be able to be effective, they're not going to be able to be up to speed. I don't understand why we would go through this whole process.
I think the difference is the timing of it, right? So I think in the timing has always been, when you weren't appointed, I think it was because Peggy probably didn't resign until later in that year, so it's sort of where it happens. I think now it feels a bit more urgent to have
Yeah,
our
I'm just
7th
curious,
member
I mean, yeah.
as soon as possible. So if we can have our joint meeting even sooner, like, I think we're in such a place where it's not helpful to not to, I mean, so we have the 30 days, but after that, it says, it's not a very long period. I've already informed them, so I didn't wait 30 days to inform the select board. I informed them immediately. So I think it cuts down on that time. But it's been a little bit it's been confusing. It hasn't been as simple, because it does clearly say the next town election, which is April. And I think just because of where we are in the year, it's confusing.
So
but it could
is
be.
it on the ballot? Is there a 2-year seat going to be on the ballot?
I don't know. Actually, I don't know yet.
Because, I mean, we should let the public know if it's going to happen or not, because they only have 3 weeks to pull papers. Not even.
I mean, I think the ideal would be that somebody who is going to go for that, who would like to be, appointed, would also be pulling papers too at the same time. So if somebody's sending a letter to the selectmen saying, I'm interested in being, fulfilling this position on the school committee, that they would be pulling papers at the very same time within a matter of weeks, so that we would know that. I guess what would probably determine it, right? Wouldn't it be if nobody has pulled papers for that, for Steve's seat, then it wouldn't be. Would that be why it wouldn't be on the ballot? I guess I don't know.
There's still some
speculating
things to work through, and as has been mentioned, it is a little bit elements of complication here in terms of dates in both policy as well as law that does intersect with this. So I think it's fair to say we've certainly we've engaged the town manager. He's aware of this, and there's still some things that have to be determined and fall into place in terms of exactly where this falls out. And so I think this will clearly be a topic to continue. But timely, of course, there's not a lot of time, and that has to be hammered out. We have informed, as has been mentioned, council, and so we'll work with him as well as town council to try and determine what the most prudent course is here and what's possible. So.
And I think we've been in touch with the town clerk as well.
Yes, yes, that's right.
We just don't have answers yet.
Correct, yes.
It's almost as though this timing hasn't actually happened ever before. So it's like this, it's a strange, they're just like, oh geez, I don't know, well, if no one pulled their paper, you know, so I think some of it will somewhat organically happen. So if people tonight go and pull, I think that's gonna be a different discussion. At this point, we have 2 seats open and we've only had our 2 members pull their papers, so no one else has pulled. So it's an interesting time in discussion. What I think we don't want is to assume people will and not move on this process of what the law says we need to appoint, and find ourselves in a bad position where we haven't filled that seat, especially at such a challenging time in the district where we need all of our members. So more to come. So we will share anything, or we'll have Dr. Brand send out an email as soon as we have more guidance on that. But I didn't want to wait on this until February 24th.
I'm just curious if I know the conversations are still happening, but do we have an idea, a time frame for when council or the clerk's office or whomever might come to some decision about what's going to happen? I think, moving forward, I want to avoid a situation where we don't get ourselves in trouble, just thinking ahead, like, what happens if somehow, parallel to each other, we move forward with an appointment of somebody, and the clerk's office decides to put sort of a special seat on the ballot for the remainder of Mr. Bjork's term, and then we've appointed somebody who's also decided to pull papers and run, and then somebody else wants to run, and we've given somebody an advantage. There's a lot that needs to be worked out, but I think given the timing of the election, like, it's really important that we do it soon. So I know we don't have the answers. My thought is that we need to do this sooner rather than later.
If I may, I don't see it unrealistic to be able to, I don't think, come to terms with this by the end of this week. We've got a couple of days left, and so I can't speak for anybody else, but I think we should be able to finalize this. That would be my hope, and we have some more opportunities to talk with our council as I do with town manager. So.
Thank you.
Mr. Epstein?
Actually, Ms. Newhouse had a question first.
Well, I was just curious, because I know I pulled up, another town had a similar situation, and they actually spoke with MASC, who told them that they were not legally required to fill the seat, and they actually had the seat, they were going to have 5 meetings before their town meeting, and this town chose not to fill the seat, and MASAC told them that they didn't legally have to, and they chose not to fill the seat because they didn't want to give anyone an unfair advantage, and they didn't think that that the person could get up to speed before the town election, and that they chose just to let the town elect the person to the remainder of the seat. So just more info for thought.
Something we should think about and consider. Mr. Epstein?
I think that as far as our role as the school committee, the only real role we have is this appointment process that we've discussed. Anything that has to do with what's on the ballot and who's enabled to run, this is nothing to do with us, other than obviously we have a great interest in it.
Right.
But this is the role of the town and the town clerk to to figure that out, because we have, it's not up to us who's on the ballot or whether there's a special election for a different seat or anything like that. So, if we end up going through this appointment process, then that's the role that we play in this.
So I think right now it will be in the select board will be back in touch with us, and then we will follow up from there. You're absolutely right. I have contacted everyone I need to contact. Everyone is informed, and I think that is my role right now. Okay. future school committee dates. We have February 11th is tomorrow evening, and it is the Wilmington High School Program of Studies night, 6:30. And that is lot.
If I may, yes, I actually think that if that's not already been communicated, I'm sorry, I believe that that is going to be rescheduled. Although it's a virtual session, there still was the intention to have some interaction with those attending, and I think that there was an oversight in communication, and so if something has not gone out yet, it will as well. Has that gone out yet, Ms. Newhouse? Do you know?
It has, and it sounds like they're still having tomorrow night.
Yeah,
Oh.
And
I think they're still
they've
doing
added
an
a
hour
second night
Okay.
for 8th grade parents on February 25th at 6:30.
My apologies. Thank you. Okay.
Well, that's good news. February 24th, we have our last February meeting here, and then March 10th is our first March meeting. And that is all I have, except we need a final motion to adjourn. Mr. Fennelly?
So moved.